We're live.
We're live again.
Today we talk about strategy number 13 from the 33 Strategies of War by Robert Greene.
Yes, sir.
Know your enemy. This is the intelligence strategy. And I couldn't help but think about The Godfather, where Michael Corleone says that his father used to say, Vito, right? Keep your friends close and your enemies closer. And that's what this strategy is about.
It's crazy.
Keep your enemies closer because it allows you to really understand what makes them tick and what their real weakness is.
I mean, the chapter is brutal. You know, he says even the strongest armies can be taken down if you know the person that leads the army and what are their insecurities. If
Their
you get to know
weaknesses.
that person. That's why there's that part of the chapter that says the warm embrace. The warm embrace is far more useful than any spy that you can get into. He's not knocking the spies either, right? I mean, he's saying, look, it's good information that you can get from your spies, but remember, they can turn on you too and become a double agent and all this stuff. It's interesting.
How does this apply, though, to our day-to-day life? You know, like who's your enemy on a day-to-day?
Your enemy on the day today would be your competitor. And I know that there's a lot of people that would hire your competitors' employees when they went out looking for a job. This happens a lot in the insurance industry. So if you have somebody that's been working for you for 3 years, 2 years, and you've been teaching that person all of your processes, now that particular person has an insight into how you're working your agency. And I'm talking about agency, but this can be anything.
Yeah.
Whether you're making chocolates, you're baking goods, cakes,
Yeah.
whatever it is that you're doing. You're doing electrical work out there. You know, you're an electric contractor.
Yeah,
HVAC.
your secret sauce.
Your secret sauce, because you're only as good as your next deal, right? And in order to do that, you're going to have to delegate because you can't do anything alone. And by delegating, you have trusted soldiers, managers, right? Generals. And so they become aware of how you're delegating, what are the key points that are important in you, and they may even see what the next moves are because they're entrenched in the business.
Yeah.
Now you go and you lose that soldier, and he's on the open market, or she, interviewing, right? And what do they bring to the table? They bring a lot of knowledge on your company, but also knowledge that they've intrinsically learned. So they actually are quite valuable. That's why people that you're training, you need to continue to incentivize them
To stay.
to continue on that vision. And some people are incentivized with money, and others are incentivized with, you know, the glory of, you know, oh, you did a great job, recognition, right?
Right.
And you got to figure out what makes them tick too.
Yeah.
So it's a very interesting chapter.
Yeah. This strategy gets a lot into human nature.
Yeah.
It reminded me of The Laws of Human Nature, which is another excellent book,
Right.
which we've reviewed for those who want to listen to it. But he's talking about looking at getting to actually know the enemy, looking at them, seeing how they react in certain instances. He says that, Robert Greene says that one of the things that I guess you can't hide is the eyes when their actual feelings in their eyes. You know, they could be trying to mask how they actually feel, but remember in Scarface, Tony Montana says, "The eyes chico, they never lie."
They never lie.
I think he was talking about Elvira, I think, He was talking about that she liked him or something. He was telling Manolo, and he's like, "How do you know that?" And Tony says, "The eyes, Chico, they never lie." I think that's the instance. But yeah, you can tell a lot by somebody's eyes, whether they're actually paying attention to you or they're veering off. And this is one thing I got out of this strategy is that, and the laws get into it of human nature, very few times are we actually listening and observing. Our ego gets in the way, and all we want to do is think about our
Input.
input.
Like you're waiting for you to stop talking so that the person can come in. Yeah. It's
I've seen Robert Greene in different interviews, and he's very good at listening. And actually, in an interview I saw him recently on, the person asked him a question, and he didn't fully, I guess it wasn't made too clear, the question, and so he actually says, I don't understand. Can you explain that a little bit, what you're asking? He doesn't have a problem doing that. He's really trying to understand and actually have a dialogue instead of just saying what is on his mind. And I gotta say, Jordan Peterson, on the other hand, sometimes in his interviews, and we've read his books and we reviewed them, 12 Rules for Life, but and it's excellent, but in his interviews, he's sometimes just saying a script he's got in his head.
I love Jordan Peterson. Okay. I think he's one of the greatest writers of our time. But in some of his interviews, he's just got so much to say, But when you're doing an interview, you want to hear the other person.
Yeah.
Right? So if you're asking a question and you interject with what you think so Jordan Peterson talks a lot. And who am I to say anything? I mean,
yeah, you talk a lot too.
I'm criticizing Jordan Peterson. Can you believe that? But I've seen some interviews with Jordan where I'm saying, come on, let the other guy talk. Yeah. But that's my own personal opinion. Yeah. What do you do? But getting back to this,
it's a little positive criticism.
Because we did his 12 Rules for Life right there.
Yeah.
And I love it.
Yeah, it's an excellent book.
Yeah.
One of the greatest generals and strategists of all time was taken down because his enemy got in.
The warm embrace.
That was Napoleon. And so Greene talks about how Napoleon was a narcissist, and he was actually, at the end of the day, insecure. And this person, what was his name? Let's look it up, because this Austrian.
I got him. Menerik.
Von Menerik. That guy took him out.
He was brilliant.
He took him out by playing the game of chess. He presented Napoleon with a wife that was the daughter of the king of Austria. And so Napoleon, who always wanted to be somehow in royal family and
aristocrats
in that world, because he didn't come from that world, finally had the opportunity. So Napoleon divorces his first wife, who couldn't give him children, marries the princess.
Her name was Mary.
The Duchess of Austria.
Yeah.
And now he thinks that he has an actual alliance with Austria. But at the end of the day...
Marie-Louise.
But at the end of the day, von Metternich was just playing the game of chess, and and that was Napoleon's downfall.
So knowing your enemy is everything. Sun Tzu says, he who knows themselves and their enemy needs not fear any battle. Okay? So it's the ultimate... you can't get any better than that. Know thyself, right? But your enemy too. And there's so much that goes into it, because Greene makes it very clear in saying, hey, listen, you're advancing, you're adjusting, you're developing, you're growing. But don't think for a second that your enemy is not.
Right.
Okay? So you need to adapt and change the information that you have on your enemy, because he's adapting, he's growing, and he's developing just as much as you are. And he's watching you too. So don't think that they got to where they got by being a pushover. You have to update your information at all times. Constantly. And it's brutal. It means you need to stay on your toes, man. And the one thing with Napoleon that I thought was really interesting is that culture also played a part in his downfall. Because he came apparently for the Corsicans, right? He came from the island of Corsica, right? And apparently for them, family was a very, very important thing. But for the aristocrats in Austria, they would, family was not all that important. What's important for them was the legacy of their kingdom, of their aristocratic way of life in their. So they would give up a sister or whatever in marriage very easily to obtain the goal of continuing the legacy of the kingdom.
Yeah.
Which doesn't say much for them because I think family is very important to me. So I would fall just like Napoleon did.
Yeah.
And there's a bunch of people just like me, millions, right? Because their family is very important. So Napoleon thought, I don't have a problem with them negotiating on behalf of Russia for me, because I'm going to let this 30,000 soldier army be built.
Because at the end of the day, they're my allies.
They're my in-laws.
They're my in-laws.
So they're my in-laws. They're not going to turn on me.
Yeah.
And they did turn on him.
They turned on.
And that was they beat him up and they sent him to the island of Elba. It's brutal. You just have to read the history. But I like it the way Greene presents it, because I've read this before and it can get tedious. But with him, it's like you said the other day, he has a way of storytelling that grips you, right? Yeah. And I think that's why his books are so famous.
I agree.
I'm very biased, though. Very biased. I mean, I like the guy no matter what. But
yeah, the close embrace. That's what he says, One of the things that was interesting here, it's being deceitful, right? He's talking about, you're making people think that you're their friend. And really, you're just trying to get information on them because you're their enemy. And there's no better person to do it than you. Because when you know how you talked about spies, the problem with the spies, you rely too much on them and you can't fully obtain everything that occurred because you're reading notes, let's say, or it's being passed from one person to another, but you didn't actually see the way that the person expressed themselves, the person you're trying to get intelligence on. And so he says, if you're able to yourself gather that information, you're the best one to do so. But it all has to do with observing and actually listening and seeing what makes people tick and what their, let's say, buttons are. And it's very, I guess, manipulative.
Of course.
That would be the word.
What's the other word that we're always looking for? Is you don't manipulate, you persuade.
Yeah.
So what is the difference between persuasion and manipulation? What would you say? Persuasion versus manipulation.
Manipulation to me is, it's got a negative connotation. So you're manipulating them to do something that they don't want to do or is not in their best interest. Persuading somebody to do something doesn't affect them as negatively if they do what you're trying to persuade them to.
But you're still trying to get your outcome out.
Yeah, you are. Yeah.
It's very interesting. You know, because one word carries a big negative, right? And the other one not so much, but you're still accomplishing potentially the same thing. It's
Yeah.
the way you present it. You know, I'll never forget this. I saw one time Bill Cosby. He had a very famous show, you know, that,
The Cosby Show.
yeah, the Cosby Show. And I remember one time, real quick, one of his daughters was gonna brought somebody to the house, and the guy was a neurosurgeon, and he was super smart. He took care of his parents. He was an advocate for the community. Everything was perfect. But the way she brought him in was like, this is going to be my boyfriend. This is going to be my husband. I'm going to marry him, whether you like him or not. I don't care, you know? And the way she presented it to the family was really negative, and they built a very negative aura around him. And then they have dinner with him, and they find out that he's such a nice guy. And Cosby says it, I never forgot it. He says, you know what? You're a perfect person for my daughter, and I yet still don't like you. And I think I don't like you because the way you were presented to me. All your attributes were presented to me on the lid of a trash can, as opposed to on a fine china plate or something. And so I think the way you present things to people are extremely, extremely important to obtain the final goal that you're looking for.
Yep.
Like you and I are getting ready to negotiate on a building right now. This is going to be a
couple different buildings we're working on.
You're correct, but I'm thinking of one in particular, the one closest to us. And I'm thinking of how to approach, because, you know, there's two sellers, and one is much, much tougher apparently than the other.
Yeah.
So how do you approach? So and I was thinking, in my presentation, do I focus more on the tough guy? And there's a danger in that, because the guy that's not so tough, you can't leave him out either. He's a partner too. So you have to address both of them.
Yeah.
So it's interesting, you know?
To a certain extent.
I got all these books.
Yeah, to a certain extent, it's like they're the quote-unquote enemy. You're trying to obtain the property, and they are the ones who can say yes or no. And so that negotiation, they're the enemy for that negotiation. But at the end of the day, you know, you try to create win-win situations. But it's battle. You know, like, we're friends now with one of the sellers of a property that we were involved in purchasing. And we're friends with him now. But during the negotiation, they felt we were very tough. Not unfair or anything, but just tough.
And right? He's mentioned it a couple times.
Yeah, he has. And so, but
he says, "Oh, this guy, you know, I sold this building, but they weren't as tough as you guys."
You know, it reminds me of the let's say like a match, whether it's a boxing match, a UFC. You know, when they're in the ring, it's death. They're gonna kill each other, but afterwards, it's respect. A lot of times, it's respect. You shake the person's hand. You do that at the end of a sports game. You know, you high five, you shake the person's hand. It's just, you're the enemy for that match. And then at the end of it, I have respect for you. At least that's one way to look at it, because we are constantly dealing with people. And I think that these books, including the 33 Strategies, has helped me a lot to...
You and me both.
Put ourselves in the other person's shoes. That's what Napoleon didn't do.
Correct.
Napoleon did not think, you know, these people could be manipulating me, or how they actually feel that I humiliated them. He humiliated the Austrians when he disassembled their army. You know, that doesn't just go away, those feelings.
No,
there's resentment there.
Sure.
And he thought, well, I married the daughter of the king, so I'm going to be okay. They're allies now. And he was wrong. And that was interesting how Greene quotes the meeting when Napoleon was retreating from Russia because that campaign did not go well.
Right.
And he goes and he meets with von Metternich, and immediately the tone was different. Von Metternich was saying, "Look, you need to take this treaty. You need to take this, or
We're going to
kick
war.
you out. Yeah, we're going to war." And Napoleon, with his ego and all, he said, "No, I'm gonna fight you to the end."
Go take a flying leap.
Yeah, but Napoleon.
And there's a part where he says, by marrying the daughter of the king, that I get played, or that's not the word he used, but Merrick,
von Metternich.
Metternich says, I would say that the wise Napoleon made a mistake or something like that,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, the emperor.
The emperor
In this instance, the emperor
made a mistake.
made a mistake.
It's brutal.
Yeah.
So many lives are affected. Because I'm going to war. You know how many people are going to die?
Yeah.
Thousands and thousands of people. Can you imagine? A lot of times you say, hey, take yourself out of the equation.
Yeah.
Remember?
I think so.
If
It's
you
hard
do-
to do.
Yeah, but thousands of people are affected. Thousands of lives.
Like right now, we're in the middle of several negotiations. One in particular, we're sharing with the investor, the buyer of this building, that look at, kind of put yourself in the other person's shoes, where they are on things. Why would they accept the terms and the offer that you're coming in with, right? And I think that it's important in a negotiation to do that. Of course, the investor, the buyer's going to want the best terms for them. And the seller's going to want the best terms for them, right? Or figure out what are the actual wants of the buyer and what are the actual wants of the seller. The seller might be trying to get rid of a headache with a building, and the buyer might have a vision for that place that really at the end of the day, money sometimes is really not that big of a deal to certain people who have a vision, because their vision is huge. And so if you can figure out what makes that person tick and what actually are the buttons for both sides, you can make it work and you can put something together. And that's the way I look at it. And for me, it's very exciting. It doesn't matter what business you're in. I think that you can apply those principles.
I think so too. In any business. You just need to be cognizant and do a lot of retrospect. Because, they're saying you have to know yourself, but then you got to know your enemy too.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I love the story of the old lion and the fox.
The Aesop fables.
Yeah, I love it. So what happens is this old lion, he's getting older and he's not fast anymore, so he can't catch his prey. So he's inside his cave, and what he does is he is using his intelligence to bring in the prey. They come and they say, how you doing? Oh, not all that well. Why don't you come in and let's talk? And then he eats them. But then the fox comes along and tells the lion, hey, how you doing? No, not all that well. Why don't you come on in? We'll talk about it. And the fox says, I would, if I had not noticed that you have all these footprints going into your cave, but there are no footprints coming out. I'll talk to you from out here, from a safe distance. So he saw, the terrain, the surrounding, which back then it was extremely important. It is now too, right? When you're going to go to war, if you have the mountains to your back or you have the ocean, what is it that you have? Is it limiting you? Do you have an escape? I know that nowadays you got missiles and everything, so it may be irrelevant to a certain extent, but the fox was the fox.
Yeah.
He read everything.
He smelled it
around the lion, and he says, no, you only got footprints going in. There are none coming out. Wow. Super cool.
Yeah, I mean, he observed that. And so when we really want something, when we're trying to obtain something, we have to be observing. That's the way I take it. We
And
can get emotional.
like the prior chapter, long-term strategy,
Yeah.
it's very important. You buy things, and on the short term, they may not fizzle out well, but with time, you know, uh, you can change it.
Yeah.
And hopefully you have time, because there's a lot of things that are beyond your control. Like this other gentleman that we know that his business, because of some laws that were passed in California recently, a business that he's been making money for the last 30 years is all of a sudden like dead in the water because of some regulatory changes that happened in California, and these particular ordinances were passed that affected his business tremendously. So he's done. So where 2 years ago or 4 years ago he potentially had a business that he could have sold for quite a bit of money, let's say, now today he has a business that nobody will pay a dime for it, literally not $1.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of things, that come into play, and politics is one of them.
Yeah.
Patrick Bet-David says, be aware of your politics. You need to know your local and state and federal laws, because they affect the businesses that you like, especially trucking.
Yeah.
So yeah, you gotta.
You need to. For me, a big thing I got out of this strategy was to stop thinking about myself. Stop thinking about yourself. To really understand the other person, the enemy. Because it's actually a difficult thing. I mean, I struggle with it because I talk and I like to share and this and that. But the best way to really find out, how do you get your objective done is by listening. And that's really what I get out of this strategy, is to know your enemy, you have to listen, you have to observe. The clues are there.
Well, if, like Robert Greene says, every single one of us has a bit of narcissism. How far up are you on the scale of narcissist? And you're right, son, because look, McNaughton, when they were in Afghanistan, everything that he thought the Afghanis would treasure was everything that was important to the English way of life.
Yeah, him also. Yep.
But they didn't want the English way.
They didn't have those values.
They didn't have those values. They had another set of values that were important to them. It was a different culture.
Right.
And
one example was him not allowing that one Shah to kill the enemy completely. And that was a sign of weakness. So when they were trying to install that Shah and he wasn't actually annihilating the enemy, they thought, oh, this guy's weak.
The Shah's Raja, I think that was his name. I'm messing it all up, but yeah.
So he didn't understand their culture, like you talked about with Napoleon.
Exactly. So, you have to know your enemy. Just like when you're making a presentation, and let's say to 100 people or something like that, you better know who your audience is, and you better target that presentation to a great extent to that audience.
Yeah.
And that audience can be people over 40, people over 50. There's definitely a big change, because people at 40 are still working hard. People over 50 may be looking more for retirement. So you better, target your presentation to the audience that you are in front of. Very interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah,
understand your opponent.
Yeah. And figure out if it's going to be successful or not. Get yourself, think less about yourself and more about Very interesting.
Very cool.
All right.
Well, this was another great strategy, and thank you everybody for listening. Like it, share it, please subscribe, and if anyone wants to purchase the book, they can do so through our description.
All right. Sounds
Thank
good.
you.